Hello, YouTube. There's been something on my mind lately, and that's how we as a society treat victims. One of the first somewhat popular videos I made was on this subject, but I looked at it solely from the perspective of how female victims were treated within the context of feminism and Gamergate. In this video, and a second part I intend to make, I want to look at this issue again, but more closely. In this one, I'm going to talk about my disagreement with how we as a society put victims on a pedestal. By this I mean, when someone is a victim, we absolve them of all wrongdoing, and if they had strong beliefs, we treat them as a martyr for those beliefs. We treat victimhood in this culture as though it is something worth celebrating. A prime example is how we treat the victims of the Charlie Hebdo murders. This was recently in the news because the PEN American Center decided to give its Freedom of Expression Courage Award to Charlie Hebdo. This wasn't really newsworthy though until 6 members of the organization decided not to attend the awards ceremony out of protest. The prevailing idea that I see among free speech advocates is that the Charlie Hebdo people absolutely deserve this award. I disagree. Now, I'm going to have to be very clear on why I disagree, because every single time I've tried to discuss this, people have failed to characterize my arguments correctly. The first thing I have to explain is the way I think about blame. The English language is extremely limited when it comes to talking about blame. I'll give an analogy to explain where I see this problem. If person A goes up to a drug dealer and kicks him in the nuts, and the drug dealer shoots him, how do you describe the blame in this situation? Obviously, the drug dealer should not have shot person A, and should be held completely responsible for doing so. However, person A should also be held responsible for the initial act that provoked the shooting. Where I run into problems is here. If I try to say person's actions are wrong, people automatically assume that means I think the drug dealer was justified in shooting person A. People act as though blame is a limited resource that can only be applied to one side of an event, or occasionally to both sides equally. People seem to have a really hard time talking about blame in a situation where one side did a really bad thing, and the other side did a less bad thing that directly led to the really bad thing. Another example might be a woman who slaps a man and then gets punched for doing so. Nobody seems willing to hold the woman, or person A, responsible for their actions. I think this is directly caused by the way we as a society think of victims. It seems like for most people it's impossible to place blame upon a victim yet also hold the perpetrator accountable for their actions. People would rather just act as if the victim did nothing wrong and whoever the perpetrator is should be held 100% responsible. So the reason I don't think Charlie Hebdo deserves an award is because what they did was wrong. Not nearly as wrong as what the murderers did, but wrong nonetheless. Now, you may already be jumping to your keyboard to write about how there was nothing wrong with the actions of Charlie Hebdo, but please let me explain first. Let's put this situation in context. At the time Charlie Hebdo published these comics, it was widely known that Muslim fanatics had threatened to kill anyone who draws pictures of their prophet Muhammad. These threats were certainly credible because people have already been killed for this in the past. So in the face of these credible threats, Charlie Hebdo bravely, it was brave, decided to publish these drawings anyways. They may have justified it by saying, I am willing to die to defend free speech. What they perhaps didn't consider, and what is the key for me, is that it was not just their own lives they were risking. It is not unheard of for fanatical Muslims to not be overly discriminating with their targets. Rather than targeting just the people directly responsible for the drawings, they could have bombed the whole building, or the whole city of Paris. Was everyone around Charlie Hebdo willing to die for their right to publish drawings of Muhammad? And that doesn't even include everyone else around the world who could potentially have died in riots in response to the drawings. In putting others at risk with their provocative behavior, Charlie Hebdo was committing what was, in my opinion, an immoral act by publishing those drawings. Now, at this point you may be thinking, So what, every time a terrorist makes a demand, we should just go along with it? And no, of course not. However, the proper response to a threat is not always to do the exact opposite of what the terrorist wants. In a way, that's also letting the terrorist dictate your actions. I think the way to operate under a threat is to only do the action under threat if there is a very good reason to do it that's worth people potentially dying or getting hurt for. If terrorists are saying they'll kill you if you draw Muhammad, fine, don't draw Muhammad. Find other ways to harshly criticize Islam instead. I don't think drawing a picture of Muhammad is worth you and potentially everyone around you dying. Now, if you are willing to take that risk, then make sure that you are in a place where no one else is going to get hurt if you are killed. To further explain this, I'll give you an analogy. Let's say there's a bank robbery. The robber says, if anyone says a word, I'll kill all of you. One of the hostages, we'll call him person X, starts talking. To me, this situation is analogous to the one the Charlie Hebdo people found themselves in before publishing the pictures of Muhammad. Sure, that bank robber shouldn't be robbing banks or threatening to kill everybody over something as small and trivial as a single word, but is it really worth the lives of everyone in that bank for person X to not let that robber dictate what he can and can't say? So, to be clear, I completely condemn the actions of the Charlie Hebdo murderers. There is no justification for what they did. However, I also don't think the Charlie Hebdo victims were completely blameless, and that they should be held responsible for their reckless actions. In my opinion, they should not be celebrated just because they became victims as a result of the actions they took. They should be viewed with sympathy, and regret, and mourning instead. I should also be clear at this point, lest anyone confuse me, I am not advocating for the banning of any kind of speech here. Anyone should be legally allowed to do what the Charlie Hebdo artists did, but there's a difference between thinking something should be legal and thinking it's morally right. So, that's it for part 1 of this video series. I expect that many of you will strongly disagree with some of what I've said here, and I am completely open to being proven wrong. So please, leave your comments below, but also be prepared, I do plan to defend my views. Also, of course, feel free to like, dislike, share, or subscribe as you see fit, and I wish you all the best.